This subway system bought secondhand trains from another city to save money, but they ended up being more expensive than if they had just bought new trains. Have you ever been to a thrift store? I love them. Whether it's to stay on a budget, for sustainability, or just for fun, there are a lot of great reasons to buy secondhand. But did you know there are secondhand trains too? It's actually not uncommon. If one railway retires a train, sometimes those cars will be transferred to another railway who needs them. This happens domestically, but also internationally. Romania has second-hand trains from places like the Netherlands, France, Germany, and Denmark. Some of Caltrain's old fleet was shipped to Peru, and you can find old Japanese trains fulfilling their second purpose all across Southeast Asia, and in Argentina. If you saw my last video, you know that there are old Tokyo subway trains that run on Line B of the Buenos Aires Subte. These ran in Tokyo from the 1950s to the 90s, and then they were shipped to Argentina, where they have been running on Line B. They're beloved by most people, having been reliable, albeit without AC. They were a big reason for me wanting to come to Buenos Aires. But the old Tokyo trains only make up about half of the fleet of Line B. The other trains on the line are also second-hand. In the 2010s, the Subte was thinking about replacing the old Japanese cars. At that point, they were already 60 years old, and like I said, they didn't have air conditioning. Based on the success that they had had buying second-hand, they decided to save money and do that again. So in 2013, they bought a small fleet of 5000 series cars from the Madrid Metro. These were brought over and converted for use on the Subte. The tracks in Madrid are 1 centimeter wider than the ones in Buenos Aires, so the wheels were adjusted. And in Madrid, they use overhead wire to power the trains, while on Line B, they use third rail. So the trains were given third rail shoes. However, the 5000 series didn't last long. Asbestos was found in 2018, and they were pulled out of service. But by that point, another generation of Madrid cars had also made its way to Buenos Aires, the 6000 series. These were built for Line 9 in Madrid, but when that line wasn't getting the expected ridership, Madrid put them up for sale. In Buenos Aires, they thought that they were getting another great second-hand deal, but it would play out very differently, because these trains are basically incompatible with Line B. They were late, first of all. Madrid kept running them for a year after selling them to BA, and once they arrived, major modifications began. These trains are too narrow for Line B. They're 2.8 meters wide versus the 3.2 meter loading gauge of the line. So they had to add these little skirts to the bottom of the trains, which is not a huge deal because the old Tokyo cars have that too. But what is a huge deal is that these trains use overhead wires, not third rail. The older 5000s, they just gave them a third rail shoe, but since these 6000s were supposed to be the future of Line B, they decided to add overhead electrification. This makes Line B the only subway line in the world to be completely electrified by both overhead line and third rail at the same time. When that was installed, they quickly found out the next problem. These trains used a lot of power. Because they ran on basically a suburban metro line in Madrid, where there were long distances between stations, they were very power-hungry trains. With the existing electric system on Line B, only one train would be able to run on the line at a time with the air conditioning turned off. That was just not an option. So they had to rebuild the entire power system for the line, plus they had to adjust the trains themselves to use less power, giving them a much lower top speed. Passengers did not like how much space the cabs took up, or that you had to manually open the doors, or that the air conditioning was sometimes leaking.
I love how you can open.
But people here hate it. Yeah, you have just to wait. The people, it doesn't open, so people keep doing that.
And now some of them are already malfunctioning. They've had to set some of the trains aside for spare parts to keep the others running. All in all, most people agree that this was the worst purchase of trains in Subte history. But at least they saved some money, right? Actually, no. Between the delayed shipment, the installation of overhead catenary, and the conversion of the line's power supply and of all the trains, they spent more money than they would have had they just bought brand new trains that fit the line. Secondhand trains that were more expensive than new trains, that is crazy. They are not repeating that mistake again. The Subte has ordered new trains that will enter service in 2027. These will use overhead power and replace both the old Japanese and Spanish trains currently on Line B. Which on the one hand means that the installation of the overhead electrification was not a wasted investment, but on the other hand means that the connection with the Urquiza commuter rail line, which uses third rail, can no longer be used. And that's where one of the maintenance facilities is. So that's the strange, upside-down story of how the old trains on Buenos Aires' Line B are more reliable than the newer ones, and how buying secondhand trains turned out to be such a massive blunder in this case that it would have been better to just buy new ones. The lesson here, I guess, is that compatibility actually does matter. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please subscribe to Trains Are Awesome. Who knows, you may be sub number 100,000. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.